Angie Marie Housman was born on February 18, 1984. At just 9 years old, she was living with her mother, Diane Bone, and her stepfather, Ronald Bone, in the quiet suburb of St. Ann, Missouri, just outside of St. Louis. Angie was a fourth grader, known to be sweet, trusting, and always looking to make new friends. People who knew her said she would walk right up to strangers and say, "Hi, my name is Angie. Are you my friend?" On the afternoon of November 18, 1993, Angie got off of her school bus like she always did. Her stop was only 8 or 9 houses down from her own. It was just a short walk, maybe a minute or two, but she never made it home. That evening around 7 p.m., her disappearance was reported to police. No one had seen anything. A neighbor who usually watched the kids from her window happened to miss that moment. Another neighbor who typically stood on her porch was away caring for a sick relative. It was just a fluke. Nobody saw a thing. Initially, local officers handled the case, but then there were no leads and Angie still hadn't been found. So the major case squad was activated 4 days later. They, along with the FBI, local police, and hundreds of volunteers, searched everywhere. There were flyers, neighborhood canvases, and constant media coverage. Everyone was looking for Angie. 9 agonizing days passed. On November 27th, a deer hunter made a horrifying discovery in the bush wildlife area in St. Charles County, about 30 miles from where Angie was last seen, just off a dead-end road. A known hangout for teens, he found her body. Angie had been tied to a tree. Her mouth and eyes were covered in duct tape, and nearby, police found her clothes, school books, and her coat in a bag. She was partially nude. She had been sexually assaulted, tortured, and left to die in the cold. Investigators believe she had been held alive for up to a week before being left there. A small pile of ice chips had formed over her body. The official cause of death was exposure, hypothermia. That means she was still alive when she was left in that remote patch of woods. Police gathered evidence at the scene, including DNA and a fingerprint from the sticky side of the duct tape, a discovery that was incredibly rare and valuable. But despite that, the case went cold. Over the years, law enforcement followed more than 300 leads. There was even a sketch of a suspicious man in a long coat reported in the area 2 days before her abduction. At one point, Angie had told a teacher she was going to the country the next day with a relative, but none of her family had any such plans. That detail left investigators wondering if her killer had posed as a friendly uncle figure to gain her trust. Multiple suspects were investigated over the years. One was John Wayne Parsons, a convicted child molester in Florida. Police searched his home and found newspaper clippings and a color photo of Angie, along with hundreds of inappropriate images of children. But ultimately, they couldn't place him in Missouri at the time of her murder. Another man in Illinois had previously abducted and tied a young girl to a tree in Indiana, eerily similar to Angie's case, but he was in jail when she was killed. Gary Howard Stufflebean was also looked at. He had been charged in a failed abduction in the area just 10 days before Angie went missing and had a history of targeting young girls, but again, nothing stuck. Despite all the attention, despite the fingerprint, the DNA, and all the public pleas, Angie's case went unsolved for nearly 3 decades. Then in 2019, forensic technology finally caught up. DNA found on Angie's underwear was tested again and run through CODIS, the National DNA Database. This time, there was a hit. The sample matched Earl Webster Cox, a convicted child predator. At the time of Angie's brutal murder, Cox was 36 years old and had family living just 3 blocks from her school. His history was sickening. He had joined the Air Force in 1975, but was dishonorably discharged after being charged with sexually abusing 4 children in Germany. He served 8 years in prison, then moved to Missouri. In 1992, he was arrested for child abuse again. By 2003, in an international ring involving inappropriate images of children, authorities found more than 45,000 illegal images on his computer. In 2012, Cox was officially declared a sexually dangerous person and civilly committed. On June 5, 2019, Cox was charged with first-degree murder, kidnapping, sodomy, and sexual abuse with a weapon in Angie's case. His bond was set at $500,000. He pleaded guilty and was sentenced to life in prison. On a Monday night in 2024, he died at the Missouri Delta Medical Center. The cause was listed as natural, and with that, Angie's killer was gone. Lieutenant Ed Copeland of the St. Charles County Police and Lieutenant Colonel John Lankford of the St. Anne Police spent 27 years working on Angie's case. They never gave up, and neither did the community. But Angie's story is still a devastating reminder of how easily innocence can be taken and how, even with DNA and fingerprints, justice can take far too long. Ashley Ann Carlson was born on January 28, 1992, in Hilo, Hawaii, to her mother, Tessa Carlson. By the time she was 7 years old, she was living in Astoria, Oregon, just a little girl full of innocence and trust. On February 11, 1999, Ashley went with 16-year-old Patrick Lee Harned to his house in Astoria. He was someone she knew, a neighbor, someone who had even babysat her before. But that night, Patrick took Ashley's life. He strangled her and hid her body in a box under the floorboards of his basement. He was just a teenager himself, but the crime was brutal and deliberate. At one point, he pulled her body out again and later admitted in court that he thought about sexually abusing her remains. As her family and the community desperately searched for Ashley, Harned shockingly joined in those efforts. Eventually, the truth came out. In 2000, he was convicted on 2 counts of aggravated murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Later, while in prison, he legally changed his name to Jesse Payne Reyna, and now, decades later, his case is back under scrutiny. Near the end of her term, former Oregon Governor Kate Brown advocated for a wave of clemency and commutations, specifically for individuals who were juveniles at the time of their crimes. Her goal was to give second chances in cases where young offenders had experienced significant trauma or showed evidence of rehabilitation. This shift followed a 2019 law in Oregon that allowed judges to consider a person's age and life circumstances when sentencing juveniles who committed Measure 11 offenses, crimes like murder and sexual assault that carry mandatory minimums. But the move drew sharp backlash from victims' families and some prosecutors who felt justice was being undone. Among those cases is that of Jesse Payne Reyna. His attorney, Jody Davis, described him as a broken child when he killed Ashley, pointing to severe trauma, cognitive and developmental delays, and years of abuse. Records from the parole board confirmed Payne Reyna had been sexually abused by male family members when he was young. After being kicked out of his home, he was placed to live with a registered child sex offender where he was sexually assaulted again. Experts said he had the mental capacity of a 3rd grader when he murdered Ashley. Now 40 years old, he told the board he's learned empathy and has been working on anger management and mental health while in prison. He described that day in 1999 as an explosion of rage, one he says he didn't know how to control. And while no one seems to deny that the system failed him as a child, including Child Protective Services, the question remains, does that failure excuse what he did to Ashley? Her mother sat through the unimaginable in court, hearing again and again how her daughter was choked with both his hands and a belt, hidden away like trash, and then later disturbed for unthinkable reasons. That kind of trauma doesn't fade with time. As the parole board weighs Payne Reyna's fate, Ashley's family continues to live with a wound that never healed. Danielle Adeline Houchins was born on November 11, 1980, to Cheryl and Rex Houchins. Everyone called her Danny. At 15, she was living in Belgrade, Montana, and she loved the outdoors, fishing, hiking, and dancing at street fairs. On the morning of September 21, 1996, after a minor argument at home, Danny asked her mom if she could take a breather at the Cameron Bridge fishing access. Her mom said yes, and Danny headed out in blue jeans, a gray sweatshirt, and a knee brace from a recent dance injury. That was the last time anyone saw her. When she didn't come home, Her family raced out to find her. They found her truck parked, unlocked, keys and water bottle lying nearby. But Danny was gone. Search and rescue teams and volunteers combed the area until dark. 2 local brothers kept looking, and about 45 minutes later, one of them found her, face down in shallow water. The initial autopsy ruled it a drowning and marked the manner of death as undetermined. No charges, no suspects. But her sister Stephanie, just 12 at the time, knew something wasn't right. Danny had bruises, scratches, signs of a struggle, mud in her lungs and stomach. Her clothes were disheveled. Her gold watch was halfway up her arm. All signs pointed to foul play. Her family never stopped fighting. In 2019, Stephanie pushed to reopen the case. The new sheriff, Dan Springer, took it on in 2021 and brought in fresh eyes, including retired LAPD Captain Tom Elfmont and DNA specialist Sergeant Court Depweg, to re-examine everything. Here's where science changed the game. Back in '96, investigators collected 4 arm hairs, but they had no roots, which meant the DNA was considered useless. Rootless hairs couldn't give a genetic profile then, but now, thanks to advanced forensic genome sequencing, those exact hairs gave enough DNA for a full profile. That was passed along to genealogist C.C. Moore, who pieced together a family tree pointing to one man, Paul Nathaniel Hutchinson. Paul was 55, married with 2 adult kids, and worked as a fisheries biologist for the Bureau of Land Management in Dillon, Montana. 22 years on the job, no criminal or traffic history. He'd gone to Montana State University in 1996 for graduate studies. Nothing in his life screamed danger, no connection to Danny. He was just there. On July 23, 2024, detectives interviewed him outside his BLM office. He was visibly shaken, sweating, scratching, chewing on his hand. When shown Danny's picture, he slumped. They later said he acted erratic, like he thought he was being followed. Less than 12 hours later, just before dawn, he called for help and then took his own life next to his truck on the side of the road. After his death, investigators collected his DNA, and it matched Danny's case profile perfectly. A full 100% confirmation, no doubt left. Authorities believe Paul didn't know Danny. This was a random crime of opportunity. He happened upon her alone, assaulted her, and forced her head under until she suffocated. Stephanie said it plainly. He forcefully and violently sexually assaulted my sister, then held her head down until she choked to death on mud. He never faced a court, but the truth came out. In August 2024, Danny's cause of death was officially changed to homicide. For nearly 30 years, her family waited. They got justice, not the courtroom kind, but the truth. That matters. In the aftermath, Paul's wife, Christy, shared in his obituary that she was heartbroken, had never any hint he was capable of this, and said their family was reeled by the news. Kenneth Elton Herring was born on November 17, 1956, to Willie and Bernice Herring. At 62 years old, Kenneth lived in Atlanta, Georgia, where he was known by his family as a playful, joking older brother who loved to leave funny messages on his sister's answering machine. But in May of 2019, a moment of medical distress led to a confrontation that would end his life and cost another their freedom. On a spring day in Clayton County, Georgia, Kenneth was behind the wheel of his Dodge Dakota pickup truck when he reportedly ran a red light and collided with a semi-truck. It was a minor traffic accident, no injuries, no major damage. But Kenneth didn't wait for authorities. Witnesses later said he appeared dazed and disoriented, circling his truck for 15 to 20 minutes before driving away. What no one at the time fully realized was that Kenneth was suffering from a diabetic medical emergency. One of the bystanders at the scene was 21-year-old Hannah Payne. Though she wasn't involved in the accident, Payne pulled over and dialed 911.
Clayton County 911, what is the location of your emergency?
Yes, ma'am. I'm actually on Forest Parkway and Clark Howell Highway. And there was just an accident. I'm sure they've already called, but I just witnessed it, and I just wanted to make sure that I guess, called the police as well in case they didn't.
All right. Were they what were the kind of vehicles involved?
It's a red Dodge pickup truck. I think it's a Dakota. And a semi was involved. And the red Dakota ran the red light and slammed into the side of the semi.
Oh, okay. And what's your name?
My name is Hannah, Hannah. Last name is Payne, Payne.
In the moments that followed, Payne made a choice that would change her life forever. Despite being told 4 separate times by the 911 dispatcher not to follow Kenneth, Payne got in her Jeep and gave chase.
County 911, what's the location of your emergency?
Yes, ma'am. I'm on Clark Howell and Forest Parkway, the intersection. I actually called about 20 minutes ago for an accident, and no one has shown up yet. But I am under the impression that the guy that caused the accident, who ran the red light, is drunk, and he's gotten back in his car, and he's looking like he's trying to drive away.
Okay, can you get his tag number?
Hold on. Oh, he's driving away. It's a red Dodge Dakota. Give me 1 second. Hold on. Okay, so he is going west, down Clark Howell. Down Forest Parkway.
Okay, so you couldn't get a tag number?
No, but I'm catching up to him right now.
Okay, ma'am, we actually do not want you to chase him. We just want you to be safe. And it's
I understand.
not to chase him.
I understand 100%. I'm just going to get the tag number, if nothing else. But I am going west down Forest Parkway.
What Payne didn't know or refused to consider was that Kenneth wasn't intoxicated. He was in medical crisis. As she caught up to him, she used her car to box his vehicle in at an intersection. Witnesses said what happened next was fast and aggressive. Payne jumped out of her Jeep and marched up to Kenneth's driver's side window, yelling and pounding on the glass. She demanded that he return to the crash site. According to Payne, the situation escalated quickly. She testified that Kenneth reached out of his truck, grabbed her shirt and wrist, and dragged her partially into the vehicle as he tried to drive off. She claimed she showed him her handgun and tried to push him away with it, insisting she never had her finger on the trigger. As he's pulling it, she said that's when the trigger went off. But eyewitnesses told a different story. According to multiple people on the scene, Payne ran up to Kenneth's truck, cursed at him, began striking him through the open window, and then pulled out her weapon. She threatened to shoot him, they said, twice, and then she did. A bystander captured a photo of the encounter, showing Payne holding the firearm with her finger visibly on the trigger. Kenneth was shot in the abdomen. He slumped over in the passenger seat and died at the scene. Police and medics arrived shortly after. Payne, still on the phone, calmly handed her weapon to an officer. Body cam footage later showed the aftermath. Kenneth unresponsive in his truck. At her trial in 2023, Payne testified in her own defense. She claimed she was only trying to help and that she believed she was acting under the direction of a Georgia corrections officer at the original crash scene who had allegedly told her to go. That officer testified as well, saying Kenneth showed signs of diabetic shock, not drunkenness, and that Payne had made assumptions. Those assumptions, the prosecution argued, turned deadly. Prosecutors accused Payne of playing vigilante, of ignoring law enforcement, and of acting on unfounded suspicions. They argued that Kenneth was confused, disoriented, and vulnerable, and that Payne's pursuit and aggression led directly to his death. She was, they said, trying to play cop. The jury deliberated for just 2 hours. Payne was convicted on all counts: malice murder, 2 counts of felony murder, aggravated assault, false imprisonment, and 3 counts of possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony. She was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole, but not before serving at least 43 years behind bars. In the courtroom, Kenneth's family cried as the verdict was read. His sister Jacqueline said she felt a wave of relief, though she still wished Payne had received life without parole, just as her brother had received death without parole. In the aftermath of the trial, both families received disturbing death threats, prompting an investigation by the district attorney's office. In the end, Kenneth Elton Herring, a man simply trying to make it home while experiencing a diabetic episode, lost his life. Hannah Payne, a woman who refused to stand down, lost her future, and a community was left to mourn what might have been avoided if only someone had listened. Sade Carlina Robinson was born on May 10, 2004, in Vicksburg, Mississippi, to Carlos Robinson and Sheena Scarborough. She spent her early years between Mississippi and Florida, eventually settling in Milwaukee before she was even 2. Her life was full of movement, but also full of promise. She was smart, kind, ambitious, and focused on creating a future for herself. After high school, she enrolled at Milwaukee Area Technical College to pursue a degree in criminal justice. She worked 2 jobs while attending school and had plans to join the U.S. Air Force after graduation. She was set to receive her associate degree on her birthday, May 10, 2024. She would have turned 20 that day. Sade had this calm, friendly energy that made people feel comfortable around her. She was funny, sweet, and the type of person you just wanted to root for. On April 1, 2024, she went on a first date with 34-year-old Maxwell Anderson, a bartender she'd recently met. They went to Twisted Fisherman for seafood, then stopped at Duke's on Water for drinks. Surveillance footage and text messages confirmed everything. They seemed to be having a good night, but it would be the last time anyone saw her alive. She never returned home. When she didn't answer calls or show up for work the next day, her friends knew something was wrong. On April 2nd, a severed leg with pink toenail polish washed up along Lake Michigan at Warnemont Park. Later that day, her burned-out Honda Civic was found near 30th and Lisbon. More remains were discovered in the days that followed: an arm, a torso, a foot. Some were found near playgrounds and shorelines. Her head and one arm were never recovered. The details of what happened that night are horrifying. Investigators discovered that after returning to Anderson's home around 9:30 p.m., surveillance footage showed activity in his backyard for over an hour. Then, just after midnight, Sade's phone moved away from the house, along with her car. She was never seen again. The next morning, her car was seen on surveillance with fogged-up windows. A few hours later, it was found torched, the trunk open. Inside, police later found charred human remains and strands of hair. Maxwell Anderson was arrested on April 4th. When police searched his home, they uncovered a basement lined with plastic, restraints, saws, and gloves. There was even a hidden compartment under the bathroom sink. They found blood on the bedding, clothing that wasn't his, and women's items. It was described as a sex dungeon, and the evidence was overwhelming. On his phone, investigators discovered disturbing images of Sade, some taken after she was incapacitated, others showing her dismembered body. Prosecutors called them trophy photos. He had told someone weeks earlier that he wanted to kill a woman. As the investigation unfolded, friends, family, and even Anderson's ex-girlfriend came forward with more details. She had dated him until 2023 and told police about secret hiding spaces in his house and a remote beach he frequented. That beach would later become central to the timeline. From Life 360 data and surveillance footage to forensic evidence, every piece pointed back to him. Sade's DNA was found on Anderson's clothing. A hoodie he wore after setting her car on fire was found in a neighbor's trash bin. His trial began in late May 2025. Prosecutors called over 250 witnesses, detectives, forensic experts, friends, and family. The timeline was airtight. The defense tried to raise doubt, arguing there was no DNA on the murder weapon, no definitive cause of death, and questioned whether this was premeditated. But the jury wasn't buying it. On June 6, 2025, after just 36 minutes of deliberation, Maxwell Anderson was found guilty on all counts: first-degree intentional homicide, mutilating a corpse, hiding a corpse, and arson. He now faces a mandatory life sentence, with formal sentencing scheduled for August 16, 2025. Sade's family had waited over a year for this moment. Her mother, Sheena, said it best, "My baby solved her own case. I demanded justice."